Mr. Morency in the 9 years when I was mayor of Saint-Eustache, and I also met Mr. Gagnon as well as Mr. Morency, and I was in a position to observe their professionalism. I think that you mentioned certain elements that I was particularly struck by. Living in a suburban area, you talked about certain of the suburbs where there may be, for example, 300 grow-ups in a residential neighborhood. I think that there was a search in Bratzer quite recently in a very tranquil neighborhood. They are mobile. They have mobile labs in vans, and they're selling these drugs for as little as $3. So they've gone as low as $3. Can you explain to us in these suburban areas that are considered to be peaceful, Saint-Morel as well, can you expand on this point that you were making and tell us what is happening in places like Saint-Eustache? Places that are considered to be family neighborhoods, and the fact that there may be drug production taking place there. And you also talked about certain hubs. Oh no, rather that people go in and out. In some cases, they may be taken into prison and released immediately. First of all, I'd like to talk about a territory that I'm familiar with, Saint-Eustache. I've been working there for 3 years. And to give you a simple figure, in the last 12 months, there were approximately 14 grow-ups that were dismantled. In other words, one a month. And this is because we receive certain complaints or information, often anonymously, about people coming and going, about levels of traffic that disturb people and create a feeling of insecurity. People are attracted by certain neighborhoods because they feel that they are peaceful. They feel that they will be in greater safety. And when they see this type of situation, of course, it changes their perspective, as well as the feeling about their neighborhood and their possible safety. They are very relieved when police intervention does take place. If there were nothing done, then you can certainly believe that after 6 months or a year, you can imagine what the perception of public safety would be. In many cases, people might even decide to change their neighborhood and to move if we do not put an end to these grow-ups. This bill does provide for stricter penalties, and I think that in the eyes of the public, that sees what happens following these searches, because there are complaints, but the residents are informed about what is happening. But if they do not see that there are serious consequences, or if they see that all this activity has decreased, then I think their perception will have changed. Recently, I took part in a search in Ville de MontrEal, that is a well-off neighborhood in Montreal, where one residence was completely transformed into a grow-up. Whether it happens in a well-off or poor neighborhood, I think the perception of security is an important factor. And one of the concerns is the risk of a fire. Many of these grow-ups are identified because of a call from the fire office. And people who may be the owners of such buildings or the future owners of such buildings in our houses, they will find themselves facing very unexpected levels of expenditure because of the the effects of these grow-ups on the structure of the House itself. So I think that we have to reflect on that as well. Thank you, Senator Gagnon. Senator Boisvenu.
D'abord, rebonjour.
Mr. Gagnon, Mr. Morency, thank you. The concern, the intent of our government in adopting this bill was to protect our young people. In your presentations, you talked about the fact that consumption of cannabis in particular is taking place at younger and younger ages. And this means that these young people are in a vicious circle. They drop out of school. And then there are deaths because of consumption, criminality, breaking and entering. In Quebec, the three crimes that were committed by three minors, 15 and 16, who had very serious debts because of consuming drugs, and one of them killed his mother. These young people are often being exploited by older ones and selling cannabis to people who are even younger, 8, 9, and 10 years old. So what I'd like to know is how our bill will help young people in dealing with adults. Because the young people are 16 or 17 who are recruited by an adult. In some ways, they can be considered as victims of their own consumption and a victim of the system. What interests me as a president of an association I used to belong to is what the effect of this will be on the adults who are exploiting these young people and all the harm that they cause because of it. I would say at the outset that the police investigation does always attempt to reach back to go as far as the head of the network, the person who's in charge of the network. But I think the most efficient way is because of the consequences resulting from acts. We are sometimes able to catch the dealer, but depending on aggravating factors, such as the use of a firearm or violence, these are classic aggravating factors that have always been used. But if these are not present, and if this dealing was a sort of mid-level one, then this means that the dealer goes in and then is out again very quickly. There is no deterrence. There are no consequences. There's no clear message for the young people who are being affected by these networks. So I think that there has to be a certain level of consistency. Does this mean that we're going to be able to deal with all these problems? No, there are always consumers who will be able to find a dealer who is able to sell. But we are going to be complicating the lives of these people, these dealers. And at the present time, I don't think that their life is very complicated. I think that there may be some provisions of this bill when the proof that a criminal organization is involved, that there has been planning, certain real estate is being used. I think that this will have an effect on organized crime. And when you talked about young people, 14, 15, and 16, and the fact that they're being employed automatically in the police service, they will be treated under the Young Offenders Act, so that there are specific provisions for them that will enable us to adjust the police action when it comes to them, with the appropriate consideration being given to the fact that they are young and that they may have made a mistake and they are not necessarily being brought into the court system. So the Young Offenders Act will apply. But I think an important point is that we have to have the prevention part of our work as well. What are we doing to improve the young people's self-esteem, improve their school work? All these factors that come into play when young people decide to consume drugs. And I think that through research, we're going to be able to identify what the causes are and what the appropriate action is when it comes to prevention, their self-esteem, their need for belonging, the fact that they can have engage in activities among young people. Most of the time, the fact that poverty is an important factor and the need to belong. the need to feel that they're like the others, a need for self-esteem, and other factors as well. There are some people who are able to find an outlet in sports or cultural activities, and I think that it's through prevention that we're going to be able to help in this respect.
Very brief, Madam Chair.
Oh, what a good thing.
One question. I'd like to congratulate the presenters. I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Bratzer. But before I do, perhaps a short question to the officers at the table as well. I wouldn't want anybody to get the misimpression that you need a mens rea to prove a mens rea when somebody has possession of a drug that hasn't been prescribed to them. I'm sure, Mr. Gagnon, that when you find Valium or OxyContin or Tylenol number 3 or Atasol 30 in somebody's possession, and they have not been prescribed those drugs, then they're guilty of an offense under the CDSA, the Controlled Drug Substance. And to pass somebody a drug that has codeine in it, a Schedule 1, and to pass somebody that drug is an offense. And as far as there's no sense saying, well, I didn't intend to give it to somebody, or somebody gave it to me, I didn't intend to have it in my possession. I think you'd agree that never comes into play, Mr. Gagnon. And as far as the high level or medium level traffickers are concerned, in Quebec, average sentence 3 to 8 years for somebody in a medium level, not the fellow down here, but 3 to 8 years. So the minimums will not affect them. Will not affect them. And my question to Mr. Bratzer is it your understanding, sir, that after the passage of this bill...
Senator Baker, I think if you speak into your mic, it might get to BC better.
Yeah. Is it? Oh, yes, he's also over there. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. Hank Snow, you've been everywhere, man. Is it your understanding with the passage of this bill that somebody who passes a drug to somebody that contains a Schedule 1 substance, and that person is in a university or a police school or a medical school or a law school or in a university, that they will be subjected to the minimum, now the definite minimum sentence of 2 years in jail up to life imprisonment if that drug is listed under Schedule 1, which codeine is, for Senator Banks' point that he made.
Well, Senator Baker, you raise an excellent point because, the aggravating factor of in or near a school, and so the question is, what is a school? And I would suggest that it would be appropriate to the committee. Sure, the police always have discretion, but one has to be careful with discretion, and it's important for the committee not to assume that police agencies and individual officers will always apply discretion wisely. That is not the case. Sometimes if you have a choice between using a minimum amount of discretion and a maximum amount of discretion, there will always be police officers that use the minimum. So I would suggest that it is appropriate for the committee to consider a more specific definition of the word school, so that we do not see young people in university or college or somewhere else caught up in a mandatory minimum jail sentence when that was not necessarily the intention of the legislation.
Thank you, Senator Baker. Senator Joyal, who will be followed by Senators Runciman and Angus. And Senator Baker, Senator Joyal, just before I turn it over to you, I should tell Mr. Bratzer that we have distributed to committee members the report you mentioned in your presentation from the Urban Health Research Initiative. Senator Joyal.